I just spent the last week watching every single Iowa football game from this past year so that I could do a draft analysis on their punter. That is 11 games and 92 punts, just so I could get you guys an accurate review. This included charting every single punt that he did, including distance, hang time, direction, down and distance, what hash he's kicking from, and who the opponent was. It took me forever, but I am excited to share my findings with you all. Now, this being my most comprehensive video covering any single punter, I'm gonna have to share a lot of the terms with you that you guys might not already know, and I'm gonna be using them to analyze him. So we have to break down every single part of his game, every single part of the field, and all my methodology. First, we're gonna start off with the key terms. Distance. Distance is how far the ball leaves past the line of scrimmage to where it initially lands. I've got a separate category for rolls, which we'll go into later, which is going to tell us how far it goes after that. Hang time is from the time the ball touches the punter's foot until it touches the ground or hits the returner. Next, we have location. Location on the field is going to be marked by either in the hash, on the alley, which is going to be the space between the hash and the numbers, on the numbers themselves, on the boundary, which is the space between the numbers and the sideline, and then on the sideline or out of bounds, as well as the middle. The direction that goes is going to be indicated by a right or left next to hash, boundary, sideline, or alleyway. On top of that, we've also indicated if they were bringing pressure or not. Now, the pressure doesn't have to get home, but it's worth noting that one time the pressure did against Utah State, a punt got tipped. For the sake of being accurate, I did not include this punt in most of the data as I found it was a unreliable data point and would not help what we were seeing from Tory Taylor. So this has been largely excluded, but I wanted to go ahead and bring it up at the start. It's also worth noting that I was not able to find the Purdue game, so a lot of the data that I could have included from that game won't be in there. So if that might have brought up or brought down any of his statistics, it will not be included. However, I felt confident that with the other 86 punts that I got, we should be able to draw a pretty strong conclusion about this punter. And the last part I want to include are three little terminology points. We are going to have Tory Taylor's types of punts broken down into three super types, and each of them have their own subcategory. The three types are going to be labeled as the drop punt, the spiral, or the pooch punt. Now, for those who are more in depth with their punting knowledge, oftentimes a pooch punt will be a drop punt. However, I counted anything from beyond the 50-yard line as a pooch punt, as he'd likely be trying to take distance off of his ball to ensure it doesn't hit a touchback, thus affecting the data points for his drop punt. His drop punt will be anything from behind the 50-yard line. I understand it's not perfect because there might be a world where he was trying to keep some of the distance off from like the 49 to 48 yard line. However, those numbers are small enough and it looked like he was putting enough under the ball. I don't believe it'll affect the data too much. Then from beyond there, we have the super types that are going to be labeled by the hash that he was standing on and then the direction he was going to kick. So let's say he's hitting a spiral from the right hash going right, that's going to be a right go right. If he's hitting a spiral from the right hash going left, which he has two of, that's going to be a right go left. The same thing for his drop punts, where he will often have right go lefts or left go rights. So this is an important thing to know because it is going to affect things like his distance and hang time as he tries to get the ball either further down the field, less far down the field, and these are punts that might be asked for him to hit in the NFL. So this was an important data point for us to have because it will make what he's going to do in the NFL more accurate. And then finally, I broke the field down into three locations. You have the black zone, which is going to be anything inside of the 15-yard line, kicking towards the opposing side of the field. This is the backed up area, some would say. The green zone, which is going to be from the 15 to the 35-yard line, where you have the most freedom as a punter. The gray zone, which is going to be from the 35 to about the 50-yard line, which is known for you can't really hit every ball you have, because if you hit a touchback from the 42, it's coming back, you're only getting 48 yards of net, where if you didn't hit a touchback, you're getting more of those yards. So it becomes a different area where you're going to change the ball around a little bit. And then we have obviously the pooch punt territory, which is anything beyond the 50-yard line. So without further ado, let's get into the breakdown. So the first super category I wanted to take a look at was Tory Taylor's drop punt. Obviously, as an Australian, we all expected this to be his most solid, and of course he didn't disappoint. One thing that I think really stood out well was that his standard deviation on all of these punts was 7.33 from his total score, meaning that of his average of 85.12, a single punt was not very likely to be outside of a 78 or a 91, meaning that he's going to give you around a 45-40 very, very consistently, give or take some of those numbers to make that score what it is. But as we go to break down his specific ones, we're going to first take a look at his left hash going left. He averaged 46.8 yards a punt with 4.01 seconds of hang. This is to be expected. He's on the left hash. He's kicking to the closest side of the field possible, so the hang time's going to be higher. Distance will probably come in a little bit just because he is more placing the ball. Then we have left hash going right. This is crossfield punting. This is a hard ball to hit, but he actually hits it very clean. 51.3 yard average with a 3.89 seconds of hang. This is all because he is trying to hit the ball as far and as low as possible, so this helps out, and it explains away some of that hang time issue. The next one we have is middle going left. 42 yard average with 3.56 seconds of hang. What I learned here is that he's trying to drive the ball low and away from the returner. Here, lower is better. Since you're in the middle of the field, you don't actually want to have a lot of hang time to let the returner get under it, so I'm not holding that against him. Then we have middle going right. Here, he didn't seem to have the same strategy. 46.4 yards a punt, 4.06 seconds of hang. You can see here for the left going left, middle going right, and right going right, they're all going to be the same style of punt, which is more of a straight on drop punt, trying to get a good ratio ball, so they're all going to have relatively the same number. And then of course for right going left, we're going to see something more similar to left going right and middle going left with a 43.67 yard average and 3.63 seconds of hang, meaning he's driving this ball low and away from returners. Then finally, for his rights going right, as I alluded to earlier, he has a 45.6 yard average with 4.25 seconds of hang, hitting a high arcing drop punt, trying to force a fair catch, give his team time to get under the ball and go cover it. This all coupled with a standard deviation of, like I said, 7.33 on overall score means that that's a very consistent ball he can go back to. And this is across the entire season, even in some rough games like against Nebraska and Northwestern like we're going to see later, he was still able to at least get an okay ball out of it. Now, to break down what this means for his NFL career though, there are some concerns. First of all, he did have his biggest returns on drop punts. In fact, on all of his drop punts that went over 50 yards, he had 12 of those, by the way. 5 of them were returned, one of which for 87 yards. Now, if they're getting returned like this in college, I'd imagine that he's going to have some hard time keeping them back in the NFL, where the returners get better and your line can't get downfield to cover. On top of that, even though the hang times were not that bad, they really were not something to write home about. So if anything, like on some of his longer punts, we'd want him to get those hang times up even more, which with an NFL ball he should be able to do, but he might even get punished more for trying to drive the ball across the field with that low hang time like he was doing in college. Something to keep an eye on, that he might not have this in his bag, which means he might be forced to rely on his spiral punt more, which is the exact next thing that we're going to break down. For his spiral punt, he had for his overall average an 84.48, meaning he doesn't hit that ball as clean as his drop punt, which, like I said, is to be expected. The scary part, though, is that he has a 16.24 standard deviation, meaning that not only does he not hit it as well, he's also way more all over the place. So I broke his spirals down a little bit different than how I broke his pooch punts down. Instead of talking about all the different places and the direction he kicks, I talked about his lefts going lefts and his middle and rights going right, because he hit everything from the middle going right, and then I talked about how he did under pressures. So we'll start with his lefts going left. His overall for this category was a little bit weak. He had a 42.78 yard average with 4.0 seconds of hang, which might not sound too bad overall, but when you realize that going left with pressure, he only averaged 40 yards a punt, you start to realize that going left without any pressure is where he was able to do a little bit better, averaging 44.5 yards a punt, even though his hang time stayed relatively consistent between the two of those. This just says that going left in the face of that pressure, he was not able to perform as well. I think he starts swinging a little bit faster, which will bring his leg across his body, which often plays that ball closer to the sideline and gets you a worse hit. This will make a lot more sense when you start looking at him going to the right. His overall average was 46.6 going to the right with 4.29 seconds of hang, which is equally as interesting when we look at the pressures, because with pressure he has a 48.56 average going right and 4.32 seconds of hang. Like I said, more pressure, you swing a little bit faster, maybe a little bit more across your body, and going to the right, guys tend to sway a little bit more right, which plays into swinging back across your body, getting you a bigger ball. Now, if he was going right from the right side with no pressure, he would actually only hit a 42.71 yard average and only 4.06 seconds of hang on average with no pressure. And once again, going from the middle to the right, this is an interesting ball for me, and I wanted to make it a separate point because he only had a 45-yard average with 4.08 seconds of hang. So it looks like his best ball is if he's on the right hash, kicking to the right side of the field, and people are bringing the heat. This is just an interesting thing that teams want to take a look at. He did have 2 right hash punts where he was going to the left, and of course it reflected almost identical to what he did when he had pressure versus no pressure, which is with pressure he had a 37-yard punt with 3.06 seconds of hang, and with no pressure he had a 47-yard punt with 4.55 seconds of hang. So overall, this just kind of confirms my belief that his spiral punt is really influenced by the situation around him. So it's something that he needs to really tune up, because what NFL coaches want to see is pressure, no pressure, direction, no direction. We're going to get a similar level of ball. Allowing yourself to be affected by pressure really puts a lot more tools into the bag of other teams for what kind of ball they expect from you. It can help them set up a return. It can help them do all sorts of things and affect the field position in positive ways by playing you instead of you being able to play them. Next, we're going to briefly go through the individual game performances to see how we can extract some data from that. We're going to start off with Utah State. 82.4 score, which is okay, and then 18.95 standard deviation. So first game of the season, he was a little all over the place, plus they blocked one, which really kind of jacks that standard deviation up a little bit. Iowa State 79.85 with a 16.1 standard deviation. So first 2 games was him trying to get his bearings, trying to get his feet beneath him, as I could see. Western Michigan, he really only had 1 open field punt. He was destroying them with the pooch punts, but his open field punt was a good ball, and obviously no deviation for that, but it was a 92.1. To Penn State, here you can see his standard deviations are going to slowly be reeled in. He had a 88.75 score for that game, 11.6 standard deviation. So still a little bit higher than we probably want, but all in all, not a terrible game. And then finally for Michigan State, 85.87 with a 9.58 standard deviation. Here we're starting to get a little bit more in control, and you're going to see him level out a bit for the rest of the season. Wisconsin, he absolutely obliterated the football. 94.74 is an excellent game. Anybody could want that. Standard deviation right there on like that a little bit high, but nothing crazy with a 10.32. A couple of brilliant balls sprinkled in there, which are clearly bringing up the average score, but causing some standard deviation to be a little bit higher, which is not a bad thing when we're deviating more north. Next, with Minnesota, we have an 83.8 with an 8.18 standard deviation. This is where, we're going to see him for the next couple of games in outdoor conditions, just really hone it in. He doesn't really have amazing games. He has a really solid game against Rutgers with an 88.73 and only a 2.25 standard deviation. That's just him just hitting the drop punt, just hitting his ball, hits it really clean, and this is kind of what you would expect if he were to go to the next level. is to just be able to have a game like this. It's not going to wow you, but it's not going to hurt you. There was a ball in there that was a little bit low that you got to be careful of, but aside from that, it's not a terrible game. Against Northwestern, though, and Nebraska is where we kind of saw the worst of it. 73.125 against Northwestern. He tried to go all knee spirals here. The wind was really rough, and he just swung and missed. 4.13 standard deviation on his worst game of the season, meaning that he was not just not hitting the ball well, but he was not hitting the ball well, not hitting it well every single time. There's not one outlier bringing it down there. Similar against Nebraska, 75.19, 9.39 standard deviation. Illinois was a better game, which was right before Nebraska, with a 91.49, excellent game, very low standard deviation of 7.46. This is sort of where his ceiling is at, in my opinion. Like the Illinois and Wisconsin game, you can't ask for a whole lot better than that, but that's just him being peak Tory Taylor, hitting the ball very clean, not really costing his team too much. And then University of Michigan. Here's an interesting one. Or in a dome, you would expect to see the best of Tory Taylor, and he opens up the game just doing that. He was demolishing spirals off of his foot. He hit some incredible, well-placed punts. He did hit a drop punt that got returned 87 yards, which is pretty brutal, but then he just kind of went cold. All of the spirals off his foot just weren't really connecting home, and it showed, and the standard deviation is 14.48. Now, on the box score, he is saved by the fact that he was able to get some really good rolls during this game. But on my scores, it's going to show up as him not doing so well. So next, we're going to break down his 10 best punts and 10 worst punts to see what that shows us. So his 10 best punts paint a very clear picture of why teams are highly interested in him. His best ball he hit all season was a 61 4.77 to the right boundary. It did have a return, but that ball in the NFL is very liable to be fair caught if your gunners get off scot-free with a score of 108. He also had a 58 4.74. Naturally, this was muffed, okay? Took another 4 yards of a roll. A 56 4.66 straight down the middle. Piped it, though. Small return of 5 yards. And then a 52 4.99, which was somehow managed to be returned for 11 yards. A 56 4.55 return for 3 yards. 53 4.77. This one was out of bounds. You cannot get a much better ball than that. 52 4.86 to the right boundary. This one took an unfortunate roll for a touchback. 54 4.57 to the right numbers. This had a bit of a roll for 7 yards, but a very playable ball. A 53 4.58 to the left hash. Now, one thing you're going to notice about all these is that they're all spirals. And the truth is that Tory Taylor's top end comes with his incredible top end spiral. He hits the ball very clean, and he's proven he could do it very well in games. But once we get down to the bottom, you're going to see, that his worst 10 punts are also all spirals. And this is the dichotomy of Tory Taylor if you're a team looking to draft him. And something you've got to think is if you can bring up this floor, and the floor is, for his spirals, admittedly kind of low, with a 49.4 being his worst one, which is only marginally better than the punt that got blocked. Once again, I'm not including the punt that got blocked in his lowest one, but his punt that got blocked still had a score of 43.5. This one is a 49.4. For lack of a better word, it was just a full-on shank. He also had a 59.9, a 61, and then you have his first drop punt of his low scores, which is a 64.4. Now, this one, for what it's worth, was a left middle that he rolled right and punted it back to the left. And this was intentionally kept low and a little bit shorter. He probably hit a little lower than he wanted to with a 2.54, but the intent was to get a roll, which he did. He got about 10 yards on the roll, and then they returned it for 5 yards, overall making it an effective punt, but, for our metrics, a low-scoring one, because I'm not sure this ball would do well in the NFL. Then we have another spiral, 32 3.68. Another, here he goes middle, rolls right, punts it back left, intended to keep it low, is a 42.92, and we get the roll, 15 yards of it, right? Effective punt shows up on our low-scoring ones. So, realistically, all of our low-scoring balls are spirals unless he's doing a very collegey hitting the ball low and far and trying to get it to roll, which he hits really well. Like his other two pooch punts that are close to this range before we get back to spirals was a right that was going left and then a left that was going right that both had under 3.7 hang time, or one took a roll, the other one was run up and fair caught. So this is just something to realize, is that what you're getting with Tory is a guy with an incredibly high top end, but that floor is a little bit lower on the spirals than, it's something that could raise some concerns. And there's not really any rhyme or reason. A lot of his lower ones were left hash going left with pressure. Like I said, that's just a tough area for him to be able to get a good ball off with. So that shows up a little bit higher down there. And then the ones that did well were a lot of right hash going right, or if it was a left going left, as I would label them, they were just down the middle. The locations of where they landed when going well was a left hash going left that lands on the left hash, left going left that lands in the middle, or right going right that lands in the middle. Later in the season, he gets a little bit more directionally sound, but a lot of his best balls is just him kind of opening up just straight down the middle, which isn't a bad thing, but it is something to keep in note that the directionality of Taylor is not as refined as it might be for one of your guys like Ryan Rico or Austin McNamara from this class. And then finally, the last little piece of info I want to plug in there, something that I think is very pertinent to the NFL, is what were his best zones for punting. Like I said, we're breaking it down by field position, and we'll start with the black zone. Now, mostly he's hitting spirals from back here, and he had an average score of 83.74. Out of all the zones, this is his worst. Now, notably, I think guys in the NFL would do pretty well to this zone because you just have the entire field to work with, and usually you're hitting the ball as far as possible, as high as possible. Next, we get to the green zone, which is middle, and we don't see a very big notable change. He has an 83.97 score from this area. So, this is just something that I thought was a little bit strange, because usually these are the zones where people are going to feel a little bit more comfortable. Then we get to the gray zone. The gray zone, from the 35 to the 50 is where Tory shines. An 87.03. That is almost, that is a very high scoring area for him. And you kind of start to wonder how much the mentality of being in that area plays in for him. Not going to get as high quality of punts when we're backed up, which as an NFL coach is something that I'm most interested in. Admittedly, I think the punts from backed up are arguably more important than the pooch punts. Now with the pooch punts, anything from beyond the 50, the opposing teams had a starting field position of 9.4, a bunch of them inside the 10 and inside the 5. So that's like a very good thing to have on your resume. But I don't think that's as important as these backed up punts. So all in all, the final recap from everything across all the punts that I've watched during this time is I think Tory will get drafted. And I don't think that is a mistake. I think, though, you have to play to his strengths. There's definitely some kinks you're going to have to work out. His directional left, you have to have a better plan with. Drop punting it might be the option you have to go with. And being aware that you have to overcome some of these hurdles from backed up and in the green zone is definitely an area that I think teams are going to want more out of him from. There is something to be noted that Tory Taylor has, across all 92 of his punts, a total roll yardage of 287 yards. That is not a small number. So there was a big part of his game that was being held up by getting some favorable bounces. For, without a doubt, while I know Austin McNamara had so many fair catches, that simply could not be the case for him to have even close to as much of a percentage of roll yards as Tory has. So in conclusion, Tory Taylor has an incredibly high top end. His low end on his spirals, I think, is being held up by his ability to hit the drop punt on all sorts of different angles. There are still spots in the league I think he'll be a strict upgrade to. However, this is a very talented class, and I don't think he is the number one, as I still believe that Ryan Rico has that right. I think somebody's going to go up and draft him, but if I were a GM, I'd be waiting until the 6th or 7th round to pick him up, because I think Ryan Rico is a premium 4th round guy, and there's a pretty big gap between him and the next guy. But what do you think? Do you think I'm totally wrong? Tell me about it in the comments. And as always, I hope you have an amazing day. And peace.